There is, John Perry Barlow this morning was talking about reinventing a lot of things, and there are a few people trying to change the currency we use and just get rid of the currencies we're using right now. I'm really looking forward to this panel. Before we have a Bitcoin panel, we thought that it would be nice to have a very short video introducing Bitcoin. You might have seen it. I really like it. It's very, very clear.
The world is in financial disarray. Currencies failing, economies in wild flux, jobs being lost. But what if you could build an entirely new economy, one specifically designed for the digital realm? Well, that is the dream behind Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a decentralised electronic cash system that uses peer-to-peer networking along with digital signatures and cryptographics to generate currency. Now, with traditional money, think dollars, the euro, pesos, you've got a central bank, like the Federal Reserve. They issue the currency and they print more or less cash as needed, but not with Bitcoin. Bitcoins are generated using a process called mining. Your computer is given a complex mathematical problem to solve, and the goal is a 64-digit number. If your grey box can successfully solve that algorithm, then congratulations, you are the proud owner of a new block of 50 Bitcoins. The network automatically adjusts the difficulty of mining so that 50 Bitcoins are created roughly every 10 minutes. The reason they call it mining is because there's a set number of Bitcoins that can ever be mined in the system. There's only 21 million Bitcoins that will ever be created in total. You can't just print off cash like they do in the real world. You're digging it out of the system like precious metals from some mathematical mine. Right now, a Bitcoin is roughly worth $70 US. Last year, miners generated the equivalent of $16.7 million worth of Bitcoins, and we're only halfway down the mine shaft with over 10 million Bitcoins unearthed already. Like any economy, you don't want too much too fast because then the value of your currency drops, or so slow that your economy grounds to a halt. It's designed to be a self-stabilising economy. Whether it actually is that way though, well, that is a little bit more complicated. Welcome to the exchanges. These exchanges allow people to buy and sell Bitcoins with each other. The largest Bitcoin exchange is Mt. Gox. And it's here that you can purchase Bitcoins using local currencies. You can even store Bitcoins too. Mind you, that can be a bit risky. Hackers have, on occasion, dangerously destabilised these exchanges. Bitcoin is also the currency that fuels what's known as the dark web. Using software called Tor, you can hide your identity online and access the digital marketplace they call the Silk Road, where sellers flog illegal drugs like LSD, heroin and marijuana. Buyers conduct all transactions using Bitcoin. The influence of Bitcoin is growing. WikiLeaks and WordPress will accept Bitcoin as cash. Even the ideas behind Bitcoin are already changing the way people think about cash. The Royal Canadian Mint have just launched Mint Chip, an electronic currency backed by the Canadian government that borrows a lot from the philosophy of Bitcoin. And ultimately, that is what's most powerful about Bitcoin. Not the coins itself, but the way it can change the way we look at, think about, and most importantly, spend our money.
Fascinating, isn't it? David Marcus, the CEO of PayPal, just announced that he might support Bitcoin. But we have BitPay on stage. So Anthony Gallipi, who is the co-founder and CEO of BitPay, which is kind of a PayPal for Bitcoin. And there is Roger Ver, who is, his nickname is the Bitcoin Jesus. And he's with Memory Dealers, but he's invested in many of the ventures. Of course, Shakil Khan, who is launching like a tech crunch of Bitcoin. So there is like a whole industry growing. I think the video said it was $60 a Bitcoin. Now it's $120 a Bitcoin. So buy before it gets too expensive. And as a moderator, we have Martin Bryant, who is the managing editor of the LeWeb, our friend and partner. Welcome. Join me on stage.
Okay, yeah, let's talk Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is an incredibly interesting area. It's an area that's getting lots of discussion at the moment. I can't open my inbox every day without seeing at least one press release from some business saying, oh, we've started accepting Bitcoins. We're the first whatever kind of company to start taking Bitcoin payments. So it's definitely an interesting space. And to talk about the pros and cons and should you get involved, we have a fantastic panel here. So, I mean, Louis can introduce you all. So let's start with you, Tony. So tell us about BitPay.
So BitPay was started about 2 years ago, and our mission is to make it easy for businesses to accept Bitcoin as a form of payment. The value proposition was there, right? You can accept an irreversible payment from any country in the world for little cost. But it couldn't be done very easily because it didn't work anything like credit cards or PayPal or anything else that a business's software already knew how to process. So that's where we saw the need, and we got to work building payment gateways and plugins and tools for a lot of the popular e-commerce stores to try to make it easy for businesses to accept Bitcoin.
So it's kind of like, I don't know, PayPal for Bitcoin. Is that if you're going to put a label on it like that?
Maybe more like the MasterCard, right? We strictly stay on the merchant acquiring side. People can send money to each other with Bitcoin without going through us. But if you want a nice automated system for your business that can not only just make it easy, but also eliminate the volatility and help you, get your local currency in your bank account, that's what our service can do.
Okay, and Shaquille, yeah, so you're head of special projects at Spotify and founder of CoinDesk, which is, it's kind of like a tech blog, but specifically about Bitcoin. Tell us, why did you start that?
So I'm an investor in BitPay. My interest has been in digital currency for a couple of years, invested in BitPay, saw how the industry was moving, and about just over 2 months ago, there was a huge wave. There's a lot of media writing about Bitcoins, and I was being continuously asked by finance houses and VCs and various other people who I would regard as very smart, going, hey, should I buy Bitcoins? What's the situation in Mt. Gox? And I realized there's obviously a information issue here, so I came back, asked my team that we should try and work on something, and 4 weeks later, 1st of May, we launched CoinDesk.com, which I would like to think one day can become the Bloomberg or the Reuters of digital currency as a whole. Bitcoin just happens to be the largest digital currency out there. So it was started from a need, and then let's see where it ends up.
Okay, and what kind of things are you writing about them? What's some of the most interesting trends you're seeing?
So, breaking news is one thing, but as you said, there's daily press releases happening. So one is price. A lot of people come back to look at price. We're trying to do a lot more research, in-depth research from the financial system side of things, talking about the legislation and the compliance side of things. But the most interesting thing for me has come in the people who are reaching out to CoinDesk, and it's been family offices or large funds asking if we can provide them with, kind of deep research to look at investing in Bitcoin as an asset class. Now, I never thought that would be the case. So you can see that whilst you've got the internet entrepreneur using Bitcoins, or you've got WordPress bloggers using Bitcoins, you also have large-scale finance houses at least starting to look into it and take it as a serious alternative asset class.
Okay, so Roger, you're an investor in Bitcoin-related startups. So what kind of companies are innovating around Bitcoin?
Bitcoin applies to any type of business anywhere in the world. When I discovered Bitcoin, I realized that without exaggeration, this is the most important invention in the history of the world since the internet. It's going to change everything. So any business has lots and lots of reasons that they would want to use Bitcoin. If you're using money in your business, you should be using Bitcoin. And it's going to be easier and easier for everyone around the world to use it. And I'm really excited about that. And everyone here, if you don't know much about Bitcoin, go and Google it tonight. Take a look. It's going to change the entire planet.
You're definitely the enthusiast. That definitely comes across. But why now? Why is Bitcoin suddenly? Why is it its time now?
Sure. Bitcoin is the first time in the entire history of the world in which one person can send and receive money with any other person anywhere on the planet. It doesn't matter if they have a bank account. It doesn't matter if they have credit cards. It doesn't matter about anything at all. If you have access to the internet and a computing device, you can now send and receive payment with anyone else anywhere in the world, and it's impossible for anyone to block you from sending or receiving that payment. It's impossible for anyone to freeze your account. It's impossible for any third party to interject themselves into that transaction in any way whatsoever, and that's never existed before in the entire history of the world, and it's going to change everything.
You say that, but then there's lots of news stories about horrible things about people losing all their bitcoins and all that kind of thing. So from a security point of view, well, yeah, Tony, what should people be aware of when it comes to the kind of risks associated with Bitcoin?
So Bitcoin works as a public-private key cryptography, right? The public part is your address. That's what the whole world can see. That's how people send you money. The private part is your private key that you have to keep secret. That is what allows you to spend from that address. Now, if you were to delete or lose that private key, then you would not be able to spend your money. If somebody deletes that private key or takes it from you, then they can start spending your money, right? So the user, it puts a lot of responsibility on the user now to maintain their private keys. You can encrypt them with a password. You know, most people tend to use passwords that are short and easy to remember. That's not going to work with Bitcoin. There are some services that will let you store your Bitcoins with them and create an account. Well, that's okay, but that kind of defeats the purpose of Bitcoin, where you're no longer in control of your money. You can only withdraw it, if and when they allow you to. So the security, I think, is just a basic level of, can users, understand how encryption works, how to secure their data. The average person now can understand how to secure a physical possession, but you ask them how to secure their data, it's a little bit more difficult. So that's why I think we're starting to see businesses adopt Bitcoin first, because they have the skills, and I think the consumers will come on board a little bit later.
Okay, so in terms of businesses then specifically, I was reading an article earlier about how businesses who don't properly look after the way their information is shared across Bitcoin can accidentally share all of their transaction history with anyone, basically. So there are risks there. So if there is a business in the audience here thinking, maybe I'll accept Bitcoin, what should they be aware of as a business specifically?
Well, first of all, BitPay can solve that problem, but if a business were to do it themselves, yeah, they tell the customer to pay to a Bitcoin address. Maybe they put it up on their website. Great, now the whole world knows their Bitcoin address, and the whole world, because it's public record, they can see exactly how much money is in that address. More importantly, they can see every in and out from that address, so you can start to reverse engineer some funds flow. And that's why the privacy is really important, and we talk about that a lot. Because everything is out in the open, it's like everybody living in glass houses. You have to put some clothes on to protect your privacy. And that's where it kind of butts heads with the regulators, who are always used to identify the person. With Bitcoin, you really can't do that. You have to maintain your privacy. Otherwise, if you run a business, your competitor can see exactly what your funds flow is. Now, with BitPay, that's part of what we do. We create a one-time use address for every transaction. And so it's a little bit more difficult to reverse engineer it than if a business were to just use one address by themselves.
Okay, and Shaquille, think about the consumers. How do we, I say we, I'm not doing it, but how does the industry make sure the education around how to handle Bitcoin is presented in a way that the average consumer can understand?
So, I mentioned earlier on, I'm a huge believer in digital currency, and Bitcoin happens to be the largest digital currency. Is it going to be much more different than from a use case scenario and from a behavior scenario of when Amazon launched their coins, or the Apple App Store ecosystem? They're all virtual currencies. Let's leave aside how Bitcoins are mined in the first place, because that's a different conversation. And then it's just going to be down to the merchants to educate. You're starting to see, as is always the case, the forward thinkers, people like Electronic Frontier Foundation, WordPress, and Automatic, they now offer it. Reddit now allow you to tip people on Reddit with Bitcoins. So you're starting to see that the early adopters are starting to embrace it. I'm sure eventually you'll start seeing some non-profits starting to embrace it. I know there was a charity a couple of weeks ago who announced that they would accept donations by Bitcoin purely because people in the Bitcoin space wanted to donate. And they said, well, we're only willing to donate if you'll accept Bitcoin. So I think it's a long journey ahead. But one of the ways you could look at it is the internet in 95 and 96. I remember getting continuous AOL CDs, and that was my education into the internet. Doesn't mean it was necessarily right, but that was similar to where we are in the Bitcoin space right now. So there's a lot of education take place before it goes fully mainstream. I know Roger would love everyone here to go out and buy a Bitcoin. So would I, but it isn't going to happen. But just continuous education of the users, of the media, and also the businesses involved will get us to a stage where people are comfortable using digital currency.
Yeah. Roger's really good at it. He got me set up with a Bitcoin wallet backstage, and maybe you should just go house to house right around the world and get it. But yeah, so one problem with Bitcoin, as I see it, and what has kind of put me off it a bit, is the way the value seems to fluctuate wildly. I mean, not necessarily day to day, but you've seen like the value fall away and rise, and so it seems like there's a lot of speculation around it. People maybe just investing in Bitcoin to cash out a few weeks later. Is that something that people should be wary of? What are your thoughts on the value of Bitcoin?
I think that's actually one of the things that, one of the properties that makes Bitcoin so much more attractive than dollars or euros or yen is that the supply of Bitcoins is limited by the laws of mathematics. We don't have to trust any politician or bank or anybody like we do with dollars or euros or yen. The politicians can print more at any time. With Bitcoin, we know there will never ever be more than 21 million Bitcoins in the entire world. So as more and more people start using Bitcoins in their day-to-day life, the price of Bitcoin in terms of dollars or euros will have to increase in order to accommodate the additional demand. So if anybody has bought Bitcoins at any point other than maybe about a 2 or 3 week period in the entire history of Bitcoin, your Bitcoins today are worth more than at the time you bought it. And I think if you were to buy Bitcoins today, if you hold on to them for another year, almost for sure they're going to wind up being worth more than what they're worth today. Whereas I definitely can't say the same with the US dollar or the euro or the Japanese yen. And that's, I think, is one of the most attractive aspects of Bitcoin, is that the supply is limited. Nobody can change that.
But if I was a business, I'd be worried about putting my having a percentage of my funds in Bitcoin if the bottom's going to fall out of it tomorrow. And isn't that a worry? Or should they just have to wait it out for the value to rise again? Think of it as a long-term investment.
It depends on your time horizon. If you have a really short time horizon, then maybe you would want to convert your Bitcoins as soon as you receive them in payment into a government-issued currency. BitPay does that exact service. The people that use Tony's service can choose. When they receive Bitcoins, they can choose what % they want to keep in Bitcoins and what % they want to be converted into whatever government-issued currency and deposited right into their bank account. So it allows the user to define what sort of exposure they want to have to the Bitcoin currency risk. But with Bitcoins, you can accept payment from anyone in any country in the entire planet with no risk of fraud. There's no other payment system in existence on the planet that can do that.
Yeah. And does Bitcoin have an image problem at the moment, do you think? It seems to get associated a lot with the black market and things like that.
Well, those are the stories that the press likes to write about. But, I mean, remember back in the early 90s, like Shaquille mentioned, right? Maybe 93, 94. It seems like every other article was, you know, the internet is bad. The internet is dangerous. The internet is full of scams. Stay away. Right? And if we had listened to that, then we would have never had the innovation to create companies like Yahoo and AOL and Amazon. So there's a lot of positive things that are going on. They just don't tend to get reported. You know, with BitPay, we have over 7,500 merchants right now, right? Almost 8,000. And these obviously are all legitimate businesses that want to use Bitcoin. And, you know, I can't speak on behalf of people that are using for illicit purposes, but that's not going to happen on our service.
Yeah. Okay. And Shaquille, will we ever see a country adopt Bitcoin as its main currency? And maybe not that, but will it ever become a truly mainstream currency?
Define in what you think, or what the rest
Well,
of the
where
thing.
every store has Bitcoin by default, for example, Bitcoin payments by default.
So could it be complementary to the Visas, American Expresses, MasterCards? I think it could be. Is it going to take over and we're no longer going to have cash? I personally don't think that's going to happen, but that's just my opinion. But based on conversations that I'm starting to have, and again, you know, you see long timelines where PayPal, for example, they're aware of it, you know, but they're a part of a listed company, so they can't just turn around tomorrow and say, hey, we're going to start getting involved in Bitcoin. There's a lot of other things that have to happen before that can happen. So are we going to see a country maybe called Bitcoinstan? Probably not. You know, is Cyprus going to dump whatever the little they've got left and embrace that? Probably not. But each event like this that takes place, the masses get access to information that, you know, maybe the old system does have some flaws with it. I mean, I always try and use the scenario of what took place in Cyprus. Now you said, the value goes up and down, or businesses, your money is stored in Bitcoins. So you're a business in Cyprus, or you're a private individual, and you've been saving money. And basically it was daylight robbery, right? What took place, where they just came and seized your bank accounts. You weren't the ones who caused the trouble. It was the banks who got themselves into trouble. But you know what? We screwed up, so we're going to seize your money. That's one side. Then if you look at the quantitative easing side of things, and banks and countries printing money. So it's a whole minefield out there, and I'm in no way educated enough to speak about it, but just think about the bigger picture, and Bitcoin offers an alternative way of thinking and an alternative solution.
Yeah, so Roger, you are very clearly on a mission to convert people to the joys of Bitcoin. When will you be satisfied? When will your job be done on that front?
Nobody's asked me that question before. I think one of the things that I'm most excited about, though, in regards to Bitcoin are the things that Shaq was just talking about. If the world was using Bitcoin as their currency, the Cyprus bank seizures couldn't have happened. The quantitative easing in the United States can't happen. Governments will no longer be able to control what people do with their own money. And if you're in favor of individuals having control over their own money, that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. Now the world, anybody in the entire planet now has a tool to where they can have complete control over their own money, regardless of what some politician in some far-off city decides. And I think that's a wonderful, wonderful thing for everyone on the entire planet. So most people at this point haven't even heard the word Bitcoin. But I think my goal will be achieved when at least everybody has at least heard of Bitcoin and realizes that they have the option to use it if they so choose.
And the kind of utopia, in a way, you're talking about there, is a very different world in a lot of ways. And it feels to me like if people did have that kind of control over their money, a lot of the economic structures that we know today would be fundamentally changed, and a lot of kind of elements of society would be changed. Have you thought much about how this new world would look?
Yes, that's why I'm so excited about Bitcoin. All these structures in our society today are going to change, and they're going to change for the better. And that's why I'm so excited about Bitcoin.
But will we see a kickback from governments and who see this new world coming and obviously want to keep a lid on it?
It's possible that they'll try, but that's one of the other really, really exciting things about Bitcoin is that even if governments decide that they don't like it, because it's a peer-to-peer network, the only way that governments could stop Bitcoin would be to shut down the entire internet in the entire world. And I don't think that's a reality at this point.
And what's your thought about the future of Bitcoin then?
It does get a lot of press as a currency, and that's how it trades, but the real asset here, the real innovation is the network. And Shaq mentioned it before, can it sit alongside Visa and American Express, which are proprietary rails? Now Bitcoin is an open source peer-to-peer payment network. And when you start talking about wider adoption, I think what will happen is people will start using Bitcoin, not even realize that they're using it, right? It will be the mechanism behind the scenes of whatever wallet you're using that actually sends the payment. But if you're a customer in France, it could look like you have a wallet with euros in it. And if you want to send a payment, it'll just convert to Bitcoin and send it. And then when it lands in Roger's wallet in Japan, it'll convert from Bitcoin back to yen. So Bitcoin is the mechanism to get the payment from point A to point B. And I think that's the real innovation. What is at point A and what is at point B can be Bitcoin, it can be anything else.
Okay, and let's go back to Bitcoin's image problem. And because I do think that, and it is, let's say, the media's fault, I'm sure, in a lot of ways, for kind of reporting on a lot of negative elements of Bitcoin. But I was having a Twitter conversation last night, and Kevin Marks tweeted, "I do wonder if Bitcoin isn't a giant NSA operation to create a global audit trail of supposedly anonymous transactions." Now, I think he was probably being a little flippant there, but it does flag up a point that Bitcoin does have quite mysterious beginnings. People aren't really sure, the person who created it under a pseudonym or that kind of thing. So should people worry about that at all?
Well, I think, no matter who created it, it's out there now, and people are starting to use it, and it's an open source project, and there are developers that are building upon it. Who created it, whether it was one person or a group of people, I don't really think it matters at this point. It's always kind of fun. People go on a hunt to try to search for Satoshi, if he exists. But we're proceeding with our business, just working with the product as it is today.
And do you have any idea who Satoshi is?
No, I don't.
Any theory?
No.
Does CoinDesk have any theory of the truth behind the
Absolutely.
story?
I mean, we get one email every couple of days of somebody who reckons they know who he is and they can share some information. But I don't spend my time worrying about that, because that, to an extent, is irrelevant. What we've got to be looking at is, where do we go from here? It's already happened, right? Yeah. So rather than try and go back and why was it created, etc., I'm sure there are far smarter people with a far different agenda than mine. And for me, this started off as something which I was curious about, and then I realized the more information that I can get, one, for myself, but two, for the mass market, is just a good thing. So I try and cover every company out there, and also the alternative currencies, right? So you've got Bitcoin, but you've got a bunch of other currencies out there, and the more information that's out there, the better. And one of my colleagues actually said to me the other day, it's not until, I don't know, Psy or some gangster rapper mentions Bitcoin in some video, pop video, you're going to go from Cristal champagne to Bentleys to Bitcoin, that we're going to go mainstream. So I'm going to try and see who's going to...
I can see Kim.com doing that in one of his music
I think he's
videos.
Continuously on about it, but he has far bigger problems than to be getting into Bitcoin. So.
Yeah, and so I've asked Tony and Shaquille. Roger, do you have any theories around the beginnings of Bitcoin?
No, but because the software is open source, it doesn't matter who created it. Anybody can read the software code. You don't have to trust any of us on the stage. Anybody can go out there and read it and know exactly how Bitcoin's going to behave. And you don't have to trust anybody but the rules of mathematics. And that's a lot more trustworthy than your local banker or politician. So.
Okay. I think it'd be good to see if anyone has any questions in the audience.
It'd be interesting to see who had heard of Bitcoin before today and who actually has Bitcoin.
Okay, yeah. Put your hand up if you have a Bitcoin wallet.
A lot of people.
Wow.
Yeah, quite a few, yeah. And put your hand up if you, let's put it this way around, if you had heard of Bitcoin before today.
Everybody.
You should hope so, really. As a LeWeb audience, you should probably hope so, yeah. Okay, so do we have any questions? There'll be a microphone coming to you. Okay, there's somebody down here.
So would it be crazy to kind of speculate that, by the way, my name is Asha Jadeja, I'm venture capitalist, Silicon Valley, Palo Alto, California. Would it be crazy to speculate that, if all this goes well, Bitcoins and, things like that, that we might even start seeing things like defense and the nation state beginning to look a little bit weaker in our lifetimes? I mean, thoughts to the panel?
Yeah. Anyone want to pick up on that?
Yeah, one of the things that governments around the world today do currently is they finance their wars and the things that they do through inflation. They just print money for whatever it is that they want to spend it on. If the world were using Bitcoin, that would no longer be a possibility. So if you're opposed to governments inflating currency to pay for wars around the world, Bitcoin should be something you're interested in.
Yeah, and one thing, obviously, we're talking here at LeWeb, right? The entire internet has brought people together all over the world. You can now communicate through email or Skype or multimedia, voice over IP, like that you couldn't do 20 years ago. And I think Bitcoin is the next evolution in that. It's basically money over IP. And it's going to enable a lot of people to be able to transact and be more connected around the world, both for consumers and for businesses.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, we've got somebody at the back there. Someone's coming to you now. Sorry, there's a microphone coming to you now.
This all sounds very plausible, but one thing that troubles me is when the money is mined, I just instantly get 50 of these coins. I would feel a lot more comfortable about this currency if I actually exchanged another currency at the time they were minted. It just seems like money for nothing. How would you justify that, or how do you all feel about that?
I can explain that one. The mining is a difficult aspect, but think of it as the data center for Bitcoin. Any payment network, whether you're Visa or PayPal, you have to have a data center, right? And the data center sorts the transactions, it makes sure that they're valid, and it puts them in the proper sequence. Well, when you have a completely distributed peer-to-peer payment network, where do you put the data center? And that's where the mining comes in. It allows any individual person to contribute part of their computing power to being part of the data center. So it is a distributed computing project, just like SETI at home or some of the others. It's far surpassed them in terms of its power now. But what you do as a data center operator is you contribute part of your computing power and your electricity towards securing the network. And it's a lottery system, so every 10 minutes, somebody wins newly issued Bitcoins. If there's only a few people doing it, you win a lot more frequently than if there's a lot of people doing it, so the network adjusts. But that's basically the way it works. And now it's kind of a race to get more efficient hardware that can not only do the computational hashes faster, but also do it with less electrical consumption. So there's a lot of innovation going on the hardware side.
Why was this side of it put into it, the whole mining side of it put in it? Why wasn't the full amount just put out there in the first place?
Well, the mining does a couple of things. Number one, it does introduce new currency into circulation at a predictable rate. So it's like digging for any commodity out of the ground, like gold or oil. The easiest stuff has come first, and then you can get the harder stuff. Is more expensive to get. But it introduces the currency into circulation, but it also provides for a consensus. It allows that if there's ever a disagreement in the accounting ledger, that people can more or less vote with their computing power which version of this ledger that they want to support. So it's a very democratic process. And we had this situation, maybe it was about 2 months ago, where there was actually a fork in the blockchain, which was basically two different versions of the accounting ledger. And people had to figure out, well, why did this happen? It turned out it was a bug. And then they had to decide, well, which one are the majority of the users on, and where should the majority of the computing power be to provide the security service for those users? And so it was a very democratic process to determine which course of action it went. And that entire system was resolved in about 90 minutes.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because everybody's money was at stake. These are all people that are all using the currency, and they want to make sure that any situation is dealt with quickly because it's their money.
Okay.
Hi. You mentioned that there's a full history of how the Bitcoin is being used that's logged with the wallet. Doesn't that mean that it's less anonymous if people are trying to use it for illegal activities? Wouldn't there be a really clear little list there of what they've been doing with it?
So I can answer that, I think. So Bitcoin is as anonymous as you want it to be, and you can choose how anonymous you want it to be based on the way that you use it. Bitcoin kind of works like email. If I know your email address, I can send you an email. If I know your Bitcoin address, I can send you a Bitcoin. But you can there's enough Bitcoin addresses in existence where each person on the planet can have 100 million separate Bitcoin addresses. So if I send you a payment at one particular Bitcoin address, it doesn't mean I know what the rest of your millions of different Bitcoin addresses are. So if you use a different Bitcoin address for every single transaction, it can make it very, very, very difficult or near impossible for someone to keep track of what money belongs to you and who you've sent money to and from. So it's kind of the anonymousness can be defined by the user.
Okay.
Hi, Gerrit Sindermann, Swisscom. What would you actually suggest to really make the money also circulate? Because at the moment the biggest incentive is actually to hoard it until it becomes more valuable.
I don't think that's necessarily the case. Tony can attest with his business, millions of dollars a month worth of Bitcoins are being spent on real world businesses selling real products. In my business as well, I use tens of thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars a month worth of Bitcoins to pay people around the world. So sure, people are hoarding it, but hoarding is just another name for saving, and saving is a good thing as well. So.
Yeah, well, we have our busiest days when the price is going up because it's part of a wealth effect. People tend to spend more when their assets appreciate. You see it in the stock market. You see it with Bitcoin as well.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So I understand that basically Bitcoin is here to solve a problem that central banks are printing a lot of money, but there is speculation and a lot of bullshit. So, okay, but you said that the money is based on computers. So who detains computers? The company which is owning computers is owning the money, isn't it?
I think I understand the question. So you're asking who controls the Bitcoins, or?
Yes.
So that's.
I think this is just a transfer of owning. This is not the bank which owns the money, but the data centers. And which guy, the guy is owning data centers is owning a lot of Bitcoins.
So with Bitcoin, each individual user has 100% complete control over their own Bitcoins, and nobody else can change that. And with Bitcoin, this ledger that keeps track of who owns what Bitcoins is distributed on everybody's computer around the world that downloads the Bitcoin software and starts running it. So with your bank or with your credit card, they have a central ledger that at any time they can update and keep track of who owes how much money to who and who has how much money in which account. With Bitcoin, that ledger is distributed on everybody's computer around the planet that's installed the Bitcoin software, so there's no single place that anyone can go to change or update that ledger.
Okay, well, we've got loads more questions, but we're completely out of time, I'm afraid. So thank you. We had a fantastic discussion there, and thank you very much to our panel, to Tony Galippi, co-founder and CEO of BitPay, Shaquille Khan, head of special projects at Spotify, founder of CoinDesk, and Roger Ver, founder of MemoryDealers.com and Bitcoin investor. Thank you to you all. Thank you.
Thank you.